Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to the distinguished representative of the Russian region. I now give the floor to the representative of the Permanent Forum, Ms. Dali Toro.
Thank you for the floor, Mr. Chairman. I share these remarks as the chair of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, an Indigenous-specific special mandate of the United Nations. Like the Global Coordinating Group, we're pleased that the consultations and remaining organizational matters for the high-level plenary session of the General Assembly, to be known as the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, has turned the corner and is entering a new stage. As noted in the 13th session of the forum, we welcome the appointment of Dr. Myrna Cunningham and Mr. Les Mauser as two of your advisors for this process. We also welcome the appointment of the permanent representatives of Slovenia and Costa Rica as your key member state advisors for the process. We pledge to work with all of you toward the ultimate objective of an action-oriented outcome document aimed at the realization of the human rights of Indigenous peoples. The Forum also seeks an outcome document that will genuinely promote the full and effective implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It is crucial to arrive at an outcome document that enjoys the support and agreement of Indigenous peoples globally. Furthermore, as expressed at our recent session, the Forum is prepared to assist the President of the General Assembly in finalizing arrangements for the high-level plenary meeting and the outcome document. The Forum reiterates the need to guarantee the full, equal, and direct and effective participation of Indigenous peoples as recognized by the General Assembly in its Resolution 66/296. As well as the ALTA outcome document and in several recommendations of the Forum. We are pleased to see that manifested today and look forward to the realization of this right to equal participation of Indigenous peoples throughout the June 17 and 18 interactive hearings and, of course, the September 22-23 high-level plenary meeting as well. In regard to details, preparations, and logistics, consistent with the modalities resolution, we look forward to clarity on 1, identification of specific roundtable and interactive panel themes, 2, identification of member state and Indigenous co-chairs for the roundtables and the interactive panel discussions, 3, identification of the 3 speakers at the opening meeting on behalf of Indigenous peoples as speakers at that opening ceremony, and 4, details concerning the opening ceremony and specifically Indigenous peoples' involvement in that ceremony. Consistent with our past recommendations, the Forum would like to reaffirm the minimum human rights standards embraced by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as the guiding instrument for the elaboration of the outcome document. Furthermore, we reiterate our support for the ALTA outcome document adopted by consensus during the Global Preparatory Conference held in Alta, Norway in June 2013. In regard to the ALTA document, the specific overarching themes relating to 1, Indigenous peoples' rights to lands, territories, resources, oceans, and waters, 2, UN system action for the implementation of the rights of Indigenous peoples, 3, implementation of the human rights of Indigenous peoples, and 4, Indigenous peoples' priorities for development consistent with their right to free, prior, and informed consent should all be reflected in the outcome document. Through the ALTA outcome document, Indigenous peoples have emphasized lands, territories, and resources, the right to self-determination, and most important, the emphasis upon comprehensive implementation of the UN Declaration human rights standards through the United Nations system, and even more significantly, by member states. In an attempt to be responsive to the request made by the President of the General Assembly earlier, for all intents and purposes, one could read the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and note through each particular article the elaboration of a specific collective and or individual human right and the corresponding member state action that should be undertaken for the realization of each particular right. In this way, the ALTA outcome document attempts to provide the ways and means to arrive at specific action. The UN Declaration also recognizes that The situation of Indigenous peoples varies from region to region and from country to country, and that the significance of national and regional particularities and various historical and cultural backgrounds should be taken into consideration. We welcome the concise proposals made by a number of representatives of both Indigenous peoples and member states thus far this morning. Such proposals will be important for finalization of the outcome document. Such proposals also suggest the need for greater focus on the essence of each theme reflected in the ALTA outcome document in order to highlight the most urgent matters of concern to Indigenous peoples. Finally, I would like to appeal to all states, and in particular those that remain concerned about the various high-level plenary meeting procedures and rules, to recognize that this is truly a unique opportunity to be responsive to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which, as many of you know, was adopted by an overwhelming number of member states at the UN General Assembly on September 13, 2007. I believe that the collective interest of all, both Indigenous peoples and member states, is to implement the Declaration, and here I quote the Declaration, as a standard of achievement to be pursued in a spirit of partnership and mutual respect. It is the spirit of partnership and mutual respect that we would like to highlight as the important precedent to be set through a high-level plenary meeting. We generally hope that this becomes the lasting positive precedent of a high-level plenary meeting. We believe that through collective action we can create a political milieu that allows for all member states and Indigenous peoples' representatives to express their concerns and arrive at an outcome document that represents the necessary steps needed for the exercise and enjoyment of the human rights of Indigenous peoples. Thank you for this opportunity.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to the distinguished coordinator of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues.